The Appassionata was written over a rather extended period. Beethoven began it in 1804, and it was only published 2 years later in 1806. This is the heart of what's known as Beethoven's middle period. As you may remember from the second lecture, I'm not wild about this notion of there being 3 periods to Beethoven's compositional life, as it greatly oversimplifies the nature of his artistic development. But there is a definite common thread uniting many of Beethoven's greatest works written around the same time as the Appassionata. The Waldstein Sonata, the 3 quartets, Opus 59, the 4th Piano Concerto, and the Violin Concerto prime among them. Each of these works is absolutely enormous in scope and points to Beethoven's widening ambition. It's not that all of these pieces are brash or heroic. The Violin Concerto and the 4th Piano Concerto are in fact extremely lyrical, even poetic works. But despite their lyricism, these are still works on a grand scale. It's not merely that these works are all long, they're big pieces on a structural level and therefore on a narrative level. They tell big stories. Even when their character is intimate, it is still somehow intimacy writ large, oxymoron though that might be. The Appassionata is not a work that one would call intimate, but at 23 minutes, it's not especially long, yet it still has a massiveness of conception that some of their longer, earlier sonatas, such as Opus 7, simply can't match. Okay, this is getting dangerously high on generalities, so it's time to go straight to the music. Here's the exposition of the first movement. Okay, many things to discuss there. The opening has the most extraordinary atmosphere, which is drawn in great part from its unusual sonority. The first issue is that it's in unison, which means that the two hands are playing the same notes, albeit on different octaves, without any further harmonic support. If Beethoven were to have written the opening this way, it would be infinitely less striking. The lack of harmony filling out those octaves creates an extremely barren sound. Making it more barren still is the fact that the two hands are positioned 2 octaves apart. If they were to play consecutive octaves, would sound as if the two hands were joining to make one collective sound. But having a distance of 2 octaves between the hands, that separation makes the hands sound divorced from one another. Particularly in the pianissimo dynamic that Beethoven indicates, the listener is hyper-aware of all the empty space between the 2 voices. In music, what isn't played tends to be every bit as meaningful as what is. And the desolation only increases with the next phrase. Beethoven simply takes the opening phrase and shifts it up a half step so that this becomes this. This chord, the flatted second, is known as the Neapolitan. Here, it's important to note there's no modulation or even a real progression. It's a shift, like a gear shift. The 2 chords might only be a half step apart, and the music might otherwise be identical, but this creates a fantastic and immediate sense of dislocation. The sequence was obviously of fascination to Beethoven at this point in his life, because that quartet, the Opus 59 No. 2, begins in exactly the same way. Again, the opening phrase is immediately repeated on the Neapolitan. In the quartet, it doesn't have much significance beyond the atmosphere of fantastically heightened tension it creates. But in the sonata, the presence of the Neapolitan, this F to G flat thing, will become utterly crucial. I will explain how it becomes crucial very shortly. I promise I'm not trying to hold you in suspense here. But to do so, I have to first make what I believe to be the central point about this movement. It is a masterpiece, perhaps the masterpiece of musical economy. I cannot think of any other work by any other composer where so much is done with so little. The movement feels absolutely massive, but it's practically monothematic. The materials on which it is built are the opening 4-bar theme, and this 4-note knocking motive, which appears shortly afterwards. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to point out that that motive, 4 notes, the first 3 of which are the same, is very close to the opening of the 5th Symphony. This is a bit of an idée fixe with Beethoven. Other versions of it appear in the finale of the Sonata Opus 10 No. 1, and in the 3rd movement of the String Quartet Opus 74. Something about its taut rhythm must have strongly appealed to him. It's a strong, striking motive in any setting, but it is really spectacular in this one. The opening phrase on the tonic ended thus. And accordingly, the second phrase on the Neapolitan ended this way. So the motive is an extraordinarily terse summing up of that relationship between those 2 chords. When the Neapolitan comes at the beginning, its emotional power seems to come from the relationship only between the chords themselves. But now we see that it can have a melodic or a motivic power as well. The appoggiatura it helps create is a small thing, but the way Beethoven deploys it, it strikes terror into the heart. It really is remarkable how Beethoven takes the whole opening paragraph and boils it down to 4 utterly crucial notes. The motive is like a metaphor for the whole piece. It is compact without any wasted space, and it's as dangerous and combustible as a ticking time bomb.